Hello everyone, this video will cover Module 5. Module 5 is the second short story module where we will be working on the character short story. So if you remember, you can do these modules in any order, but they are listed in an order where I feel that students will be best served completing the stories in that order, because this story kind of builds off of what you learned in the previous story, working with point of view. Characters are something that we kind of develop second, and so learning how to develop a good character, get a character, create a character that feels realistic and lifelike, that is a skill that needs to be worked on, usually after a student has mastered how to tell a story from a certain perspective. So we have this module here we got some information about characters and character sketching. So the characters page is just a list of different types of characters, difference between a protagonist and an antagonist. Remember that the antagonist is just who or what the protagonist goes against. The protagonist is just the main character. You may have a protagonist who's not necessarily a good guy. You may have an antagonist that's not necessarily a bad guy, but you could also have an antagonist that's not a person. It could be, if your character is climbing a mountain, the mountain becomes the antagonist because that is what the protagonist must overcome. We also have round characters versus flat characters. Round characters are the ones that are complex and realistic. They often change over time. They often have a lot more description about them, much deeper understanding. Our main characters are almost always going to be round characters, and usually dynamic as well, because they change their attitude toward things as they go through the story, but not always. So we do have some very famous round characters, like Indiana Jones, for example, is a round character, but he's not very dynamic. He does not, in the movies, if you watch them, he does not necessarily change who he is as he goes through the movies. So he may be a little bit more static as far as his personality is concerned. He's kind of the same person at the beginning and the end. So those are some examples. And then we also have archetypes and stereotypes. We want to try and avoid stereotypes as much as possible unless they are used purposefully. They often tend to be incredibly oversimplified as a character, but sometimes if you're creating a story that is supposed to be archetypal, that is that symbolically and universally recognized type of story, which we get a lot of in mythology and fairy tales and folk tales and that kind of thing. If you're trying to create a story like that, then that would be appropriate. Otherwise, we really want to try and focus on round characters that are interesting. You can also do a character sketch, and I highly recommend doing this, especially for your main character for your story. Any of the short stories that you do for this class, character sketch is a really great way to get started on that character. And a character sketch basically just asks you to sit down and list some questions. In the textbook, there's 8 questions on page 120 that you can use. And they're details that may never end up in the story, but they allow you to think through some of the things that your character might be interested in or like or dislike or something like that, to flesh out an actual person, because all human beings are complex, and we want that complexity to be in your mind as you write this character. It may not end up in the story at all, but that's okay. And there are a lot of different ways to character sketch. You can also do, you can Google character sketches, and there are worksheets that you can fill out and that kind of thing that are really great for learning how to just add more to your character, make them more realistic is kind of the goal there. So you can do this with any of your stories, but I definitely recommend it for this one, and especially for that main character would be a good idea. So the character story, these are the requirements for it. You have to have at least 3 specific details of physical appearance or personality. Make sure that the details are included in a way where they're not just a list of things that make it more interesting. And then you have to have at least 1 round and 1 flat character, and then an antagonist in the story. So most students kind of have a protagonist with maybe their friend, and then we have an antagonist of some kind. The antagonist, remember, does not need to be a person. It could be whatever they need to overcome. Sometimes the antagonist is actually the main character themselves. So the whatever they need to overcome is actually their own person, their own character flaws. Character flaws is another way to flesh out a character, make them seem more realistic, is making sure that your main character isn't all good or all bad, that they have some humanity to them, so that they are not they don't feel like one-dimensional. They have, they might be a really good person, but sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they tend toward anxiety or overthinking or something like that, and so you want to make them realistic. So there are lots of good ideas in the textbook for doing that. And then this is where you're going to submit the story. And then, of course, don't forget to do your self-assessment. Your self-assessment will be primarily over the character story and your assessment of the story that you wrote. So that is the module, and that is how to write the character short story. As usual, if you have any questions, any issues, make sure that you send me an email. I am providing feedback on all of your stories. So as you go through, make sure that you're looking back at your previous submissions to see if I have left any feedback for you, to make sure that you're not repeating issues as we go through the semester.